Welcome to the Wealth is in the Details podcast. In this podcast, financial planner Peter Raskin helps families and business owners understand and prepare for their wealth journey. Along the way, thoughtful and detailed planning can provide clarity and confidence as clients confront a multitude of financial decisions. Listen in as Peter shares stories and insight into people's wealth journeys. Now, let's get into today's podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Wealth is in the Details with Peter Raskin from Raskin Planning Group. Today, Peter has a special guest on the show, and that is Charles Gagnon, CEO of Volunteers of America of Massachusetts, a nonprofit organization that focuses on serving those in need. Peter, this sounds like a kind of a departure from our typical conversation about financial planning topics that benefit affluent families or the information that you give to successful businesses.
Yeah, it is a departure, Eric, but I think there are important themes that are consistent. Mm-hmm. And the first is really what I would call stewardship, and the second is leadership. Mm. So, I think of all of us, our clients, those that are listening, as stewards of our own families. They're stewards. We are all stewards of our community, and good stewards manage the resources that we've acquired or that we've been given. And so we're all stewards. And then leadership, in our community, in our family, is also vital. A good leader will figure out which path to take in order to meet goals. And so stewardship and leadership, really mean having a mission, having goals, establishing a strategy that moves us closer to those actual goals. And so I think personal and business financial planning is part of good and active stewardship and leadership. And my personal feeling, this is just, very personal, is that, we're all in this together. Mm. We're all affected when the neediest in our community are suffering. And by helping others, we all benefit. So that's just a deep-seated belief that I have. Helping those that aren't as fortunate, or helping those in tough, bad situations, so they have a chance of becoming positive members of our community. It just improves our small part of the world. So if we think of people as our community's greatest resource, then aren't we acting as good stewards when we help those in need? Mm. And so with that in mind, I'm real excited to hear from a great leader in our community, someone I've known for about a year and a half now, and so pleased that I've gotten to know him. And so welcome, Charles, to our podcast.
Well, thank you, Peter. I'm just really excited, and I'm honored that you want to speak with me about Volunteers of America. And I'm just glad we can have this conversation, because I agree with you around leadership and really stewardship to provide care for everyone in the community, not just people that have resources. But we at Volunteers of America try to focus on folks that have the least resources and try to build up their lives and dreams so they can chase them like anyone else. So thanks for having me on the call.
Oh, sure. I'm glad you're here. Just full disclosure to our listeners, I've been on the board of directors of Volunteers of America, Massachusetts for about 10 years now. So I have a real passion for the organization, and just, again, I'm real happy that Charles is with me today. Charles, what is Volunteers of America, and who do you serve, and how would you describe the difference between Volunteers of America, the national organization, and Volunteers of America of Massachusetts? What is your mission?
Well, that's a great question. Why don't I start with the national and then work down to the affiliate level? So Volunteers of America started in 1896 in New York City. It started as a faith-based organization where community ministers work with volunteers, and get this, Peter, helping immigrants, poor families and children, and people coming out of prison in New York City in 1896. We just finished our 125th anniversary, and the organization is just thriving. Volunteers of America has a national footprint. It's one of the largest community-based nonprofits in the country. We have 32 affiliates that cover the lower 48. Last year, we had total revenue, gross revenue of $1.6 billion. We help on average from 375 to 450,000 people each day throughout the country. My role, this is month 19, by the way, Peter. My role is that I'm the president and CEO of Volunteers of America, Massachusetts. We're one of 32 affiliates, and it is my job to lead the strategic vision and mission to serve the poorest people in our community. In Volunteers of America, we really focus on 6 areas. We focus on outpatient mental health and behavioral health services through our clinics. We have 4 large residential programs that help people who are in early recovery, that are homeless and suffer from co-occurring disorders, which is someone that has undiagnosed mental health and substance use disorders. We work with a variety of homeless veterans throughout the state. We do workforce development, employment, and training. We do also a lot of work with the justice involved with folks that are re-entering the community from correctionals, both state and county. And last, we have 3 large assisted livings that provide, I think, really beautiful, safe, and respectful care for our elders in each one of our communities.
There's a lot on your plate there.
There's never a dull moment, Peter.
No, I know there isn't. So, well, that's really helpful, and thanks for describing the mission of VOA. But let's take a step back, and Charles, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us your personal journey, because I always think that's fascinating. Where people are from and how they got to where they are now.
Sure. Who's going to play me in the Netflix series? I'm trying to. I don't want to even go there, right? So I'll try to be succinct. So I grew up in a small rural town in Minnesota. So it actually popped over 1,000 people in 1990. So the first time my wife came to the town, she was in the local newspaper. It was a slow news day. So I really kind of give credit to this small town. It was a small Irish Catholic town. And my grandmother, Murph, who was a real true leader in the community on 2 levels. She was the first woman to be on the school board in the county. And my aunt Judy, who was my godmother, was born with significant developmental disabilities. And in 1972, after my grandmother passed away, my family took over legal guardianship of Aunt Judy. And that we got very involved with the developmental disability community at an early age. There's a place called Camp Friendship, was the first all summer camp for adults that had developmental disabilities, and we would volunteer. And I would see how a lot of people in this small town would make fun of my aunt, and it really made me mad. And it got me thinking that we had no money growing up. My dad was a truck driver, my mom worked at the local drugstore. But what we did is we were wealthy because we had a huge loving family that supported us, and we had a really large circle of friends. So we felt like we had everything. I mean, we really had nothing. And that kind of got me thinking as I went through college. I went to St. John's University in Minnesota. I think it's the only all-male Catholic liberal arts college left in the country. It's Benedictine. So it's a very progressive side of this kind of Catholic social action. And I think when I went through there, and I could have gone to law school, I could have gotten my MBA, did some traveling, and finally I realized that I really wanted to do something to make a difference. So I went back to graduate school at Columbia University, New York City. I wanted to study urban policy that focused on community development, housing, and behavioral health care. I met a woman from Maine, and here I'm in Boston as the CEO of Volunteers of America, Massachusetts, and just loving it.
Yeah, well, I know VOA Mass is so excited to have you as in that leadership role. But thanks for that description of where you're from. I just think it's so important because we in a lot of ways we are how we were brought up, and those roots are deep, and so those important experiences really do drive us going forward.
Yeah, and Peter always brings his family in to provide a homemade meal with one of our congregate care facilities, and I respect that and really appreciate that. And I've tried to do that with our 2 young children to try to bring them into the world, thinking that A lot of people have very little, and some people have no one to turn to. So I think that level of compassion and willing to provide care and support and just stand by someone, I think it's an important, valuable virtue. And I think right now what's happening in America, we need it more than ever.
Oh, we sure do. I think there's so many in need, and they need our empathy. They need us to care.
You're spot on.
Yep. So, we talked a bit about stewardship and leadership. What is specifically, what does that mean to you?
Yeah. Well, I think it gets back to my mother, who we never spent any money we didn't have, and we always had to save. My mother, she's really the reason why I think I've been so successful. Not that my father passed away fairly early, but my mother, all the money she saved and sent us to Catholic universities, really from underneath her bed. That's where the money was. So I think it really comes down to, I feel I have an obligation, not only to you, Peter, and the board of directors, but all of our employees at VOA Mass, in particular the people we serve. And if we're not doing effective, conscientious budgeting, if we're not stretching every dollar to meet our mission, if we're not being really smart about how we finance our properties, so we're not wasting, resources by having unfavorable terms. And lastly, I take an obligation that we're using a variety of different public funds. And we have an obligation, taxpayers, to provide top quality, high impact care that's going to make a difference. And one of the reasons why both the government and policy leaders make these investments, so community-based partners like Volunteers of America, Massachusetts, we can do and make interventions that large institutions cannot. We can bring about a whole level of care that the teaching hospitals cannot do. We penetrate in the community where the need is. And I feel that I have a moral and a professional and a fiduciary responsibility as a CEO to make sure that we're being smart, strategic, we're investing, we're planning for darker times, and making sure that no matter what happens, and even during a pandemic, as you know, Peter, we had one of our strongest fiscal performances because I think we made some smart moves. We had some good luck, and I had the support from the board to lead with bold and really an employee-centric attitude to make sure our frontline workers knew they were essential workers. We paid them heroes pay. We gave them bonuses. We did everything we could do to have them walk in and take care of the most frail people during a very uncertain time. So I'm very proud of what we did.
I think great leaders are resilient in all sorts of environments and situations. And my goodness, the last 14, 15 months, you needed to show a tremendous amount of leadership and resiliency. And also, over the years, I think great leaders make changes. They're willing and able to shift, certainly keeping their mission in line with the goals and objectives of the organization, but making adjustments to continue to get better and to provide those services.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great response. One of the things I made a decision consciously, first of all, I was sending hundreds of people into program buildings every day. And I made a clear decision that I was going to come in and support those troops and our frontline workers. So I've been coming to the office every day. Our employees really appreciated that commitment for myself. Second of all, because we had such a long-serving previous CEO, I've tried to bring a startup mentality to our team here and really roll up our sleeves, think strategic, let's be smart, create new partnerships so we can even be a more prominent organization, thought leader, and known to provide solutions and best practices. So the funders, philanthropic partners, and the payer community through insurance are going to come to Volunteers of America and say, these guys know what they're doing. They're measuring their data and analytics, and they're demonstrating cost and benefit with these kind of investments. We want to work with them. So that's the gravitas I want to bring now and into the future for VOA Mass.
Yeah, that's great. I think, and we certainly need it. Yeah, Charles, I've seen lots and lots of businesses in my career. I've been a business owner for almost 37 years now, and I'll tell you, VOA Massachusetts is as complicated a business structure as I've seen. Not that you should get into all the detail, but I think it would be helpful for our listeners to just understand some of those complicated features of the organization, and that might help us understand kind of what the day-to-day challenges of an organization like VOA is.
Yeah, well, thanks. That's a juicy question, Peter. Anyways, it really comes down to my role is a balance between mission and business execution and sustainability, because really, Volunteers of America, Massachusetts, it's almost a hybrid business model where we have our traditional grants and contracts that's delivered through more of a traditional, we contract with the federal, state government, local government to provide services. It could be for homeless veterans. It could be for behavioral health care. It could be for veteran services. And then on the other hand, we got into the assisted living market, and we created almost a for-profit market-driven initiative that would help provide high quality competitive care, both for-profit and nonprofit, in 3 different markets. And by having this business side with the charity side, I think we have a very unique hybrid model that will certainly strengthen us in fiscal 20 and 21, but I think it gives us the foundation to embrace innovation. And when you're in a strong fiscal position, that's when you can take calculated risk. That's when you can embrace innovation and blow the competition away. And I think that the complexity of all the different people we serve, right? People coming out of prison, veterans that have burned all their bridges with the VA, people that have been chronically underemployed, people that are suffering from co-occurring disorders. These are real challenges. And I think what we have to be able to do is work within the regulatory framework. We have to maximize our occupancy and reimbursement. So every dollar matters to me. And in general, the government doesn't pay us for the whole cost of these services. So then on the other hand, we also do a variety of private fundraising and through our resource development, and we're just transforming and redoing our entire website, which will give us a brand new online presence. So I think all those things make Volunteers of America, Massachusetts a very complicated organization and business. As you know, we come out of a faith-based history, so that makes it juicy. 2, we have a variety of different populations we're trying to serve. We have over $100 million worth of real estate assets. You got to manage that. And lastly, we deal with the highest risk people in the community. You know, Peter, I shared with you, I was very saddened. We had one of our clients overdose, got some really bad street drugs, and she ended up passing away at 41. She had no family. We did a memorial service at the program location. The only 2 people that showed up for this woman were her probation officer and her public defender. But we had our entire staff and the clients, and it was a beautiful sunny day. And that just made the world of difference to me that a business and organization at Volunteers America could do this for this young woman who passed away. And we paid for all the cremation and burial services too.
Yeah, isn't it? Despite the complication of the business aspect of this organization, it is about the people that are being served. And I'm reminded of a couple of stories. So I've been on the board for a long time. It's just a great pleasure for me to be around people like yourself and the other board members. But I've also done a little bit of volunteer work in some of the programs. So one of the programs I helped out with was acting as a mentor at one of the prisons locally. Mm-hmm. And once a week, I would meet with my mentee at the prison, and we chat for 45 minutes just about his life and his world, and really it was a fantastic experience. Hard at times, but just listening to his journey, which was totally unlike my own experience, was just eye-opening. And he was released, and I hope he's still doing well. But that was just a great experience. And so that was one thing I wanted to share. And the other was at a board meeting. This was a few years ago, before you were involved, Charles. We were at one of the halfway houses that we support, the organization runs, and a woman talked about her journey, and she was a recovering addict. And she talked about one of her biggest losses was not being able to be with her children. And she was a young, vibrant woman. She could have been anyone's sister, good friend, daughter. She was just she was not unusual in that way. But just hearing the pain in her voice was really powerful to me. And so a few days later, I walked into my gym in downtown Boston where I was exercising in the morning, and lo and behold, she's sitting behind the desk, and this was her job, and for the next 4 or 5 months, I got to see her about 4 or 5 times a week in the morning, and it was really, again, it was powerful to see her recover and her move forward, and eventually she did get to reunite with her kids.
Well, thanks for sharing. I've not heard that story before. It's lovely. And the good news, Peter, is that we have more wins than losses. But as you know, we'll probably have other people make bad decisions that will either end their life or jeopardize everything they have. And we have to wake up every day, I think, accentuate the positive. We have to be empathetic. We may never be thanked, but we have to respect and be tolerant of their choices and to provide them with solutions to help themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's core to mission. And the only other thing I would add about the complexity of Volunteers of America, Massachusetts, it's always about looking and following risk management, because anything can happen tomorrow or tonight. And we have to be ready to be able to respond to that. And the other thing that I've always known, but now I realize fully, there are 22,000 501c3s east of Worcester, Massachusetts. So our competition is intense. And in every level of service, whether it be the service sector of veterans or behavioral health, we have to compete and be really competitive and play offense and defense all the time. So that's something that's always in my mind. And I was raised as an athlete, and I believe my football coach said, "Oh yeah, you can play offense and defense." And I did.
That's great. Charles, back to kind of the business organization aspect of VOA Massachusetts, we've got a very strong board of directors. And I know that's an important role in any organization, but could you describe the board's role and then your role and also how your actual leadership team, because it's not just you, how your leadership interacts with the board of directors?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the board of directors is key to any not-for-profit organization. And frankly, things start at the top. So if you have a dysfunctional board or a board that's fractured, the organization is very unlikely going to meet its mission, and the execution of the day-to-day operations that management is responsible, including myself, it will be troubled. So the board, we have 12 members on our board of directors, and I have to say they're lovely. They understand their role. First of all, it's very important that their role is one of governance. Their goal, they have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure both our budgets and compliance and risk management is discussed on a routine basis and reported to the full board. They also weigh in on strategic considerations and opportunities, not necessarily operations. Once again, that's management. And the last piece is that their overall support of the organization is key. And, Peter's given a couple great examples about how active he's been and really trying to understand what we do at our residential programs. So the board is key. I am the 12th person. So as the president and CEO, I also have voting authority. I prepare the agenda with my executive team, which includes our chief financial officer, chief operating officer, our director of human resources, and our director of resource development and communications. And we work very closely with Peter and the executive committee, in particular, board chair Jim Goldinger, to make sure our board meetings are efficient, transparent, and that the board members have a chance to ask me or anyone on my team tough questions. A funny thing is, our board chairperson, he's a venture capital great guy. He will not allow me to go 1 minute over 90 minutes, right, Peter?
That's right.
So I have like 8 agenda items. So I have to be very efficient and very succinct so I could really get what I need to, share with the board and of course, get all the necessary votes. So We need good board members. Nonprofits need good board members that care about the mission and that to give back in a way that is really important. I just can't underestimate the value of good, active, and respectful board members to management. And I can't do my job without that kind of support.
Well, you've got it. Your board supports you and certainly the organization. So, I recently had a business coach on the podcast, Kevin Poland, and he talked about strategic business planning. And so, for those listeners, it was episode 57. If you haven't heard it, and he talked about doing a what he calls a SWOT analysis, which is looking at an organization's strengths and weaknesses, and also looking at the external opportunities and threats. So being the leader that you are, I know you aren't standing still. So talk about VOA's strengths and weaknesses, and then those opportunities and threats that you see.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Well, as you know, Peter, we're launching a new enterprise-wide strategic plan. So this is a great question. And I would say that we made some good and strong strategic decisions and moves during the pandemic, but certainly certain aspects of the planning were really suspended because, we really were in uncharted territory. But let's start with some of the strengths. First of all, we're part of this national organization. So the national team, Washington, D.C., their job is to support affiliates and make sure we thrive and grow, stay mission focused, but also adopt best business practices. So this year, Volunteers of America and the National provided a variety of good resources that we could use to really bolster our strategic position. So for instance, we got a $50,000 grant to do a new strategic brand and marketing plan for our behavioral health services. Very helpful, hired a great consultant. So we have this great national structure that is really solid. Like I said, $1.6 billion, all total with all affiliates. So we're a force to be reckoned with nationally. Second of all, we have this rich history. And the history shows that certain elements that started in 1896 are true today. So staying focused on our mission that really has never changed, and making sure that funders, both public and private, understand that people want to invest in our mission. And last thing, and I give Peter and the previous CEO, Tom Bierbaum, we are in a strong fiscal position. Along with our chief financial officer, we have very solid financial statements, including our balance sheet. We have not had to use our line of credit in 7 years, which is unheard of. And I think that we're in a really good position to scale the organization and really go into this next phase. I mean, some of the weaknesses, I've had some candid discussions with my other CEOs. Volunteers of America, Massachusetts, or Volunteers of America it's a confusing name. We have this rich history, but people are like, well, are you part of City Year? Do you only work with volunteers? You have 32 affiliates that come up online and they're all different. So we have a major brand challenge that we have to fix. And that's one of the reasons why we're redoing our website. We're using common language across all of our programs. Everyone can actually really share our mission statement, every employee. We have a new tagline, Peter knows this, care today, opportunity tomorrow. And I think the lack of awareness, I'm a very different leader than the previous CEO, and I'm going to serve as an ambassador to make sure people know about our great work at all four corners of Massachusetts. I think the threats really come down. We have some very large behavioral health organizations that are kind of market leaders. And we've made a strategic decision and shift to make behavioral health one of our our strategic priorities. One of my intention with the strategic plan is to transform Volunteers America into an integrated care management organization. We're going to bust down silos, and we're going to create intentional integration to provide whole person care to every client we see. That's exciting. It's the future of healthcare. I believe it's the future of human services. But a lot of people are trying to do that and haven't done successfully. But I believe we can do that because we're a smaller organization, we're more nimble, and we're ready to pivot. The other thing is geographic position. We have a lot of opportunities in Metro West, Worcester County, and even in Essex County. So I think we have a lot of opportunities outside of Greater Boston, even though most of our programs are in Greater Boston. So we're evaluating the opportunities and threats currently that we have in the metro area in Boston. And the last opportunities, the good news is there's several great opportunities. I just hired a new director of workforce development. We landed a $4 million grant, the only one in New England, from the Department of Labor to help people coming out of the justice system secure permanent employment. That's a significant investment. And the woman I hired is a leader in the state. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there. I think the conversion and transformation of Volunteers America into an integrated care business model is going to make us more competitive and allow us to position and negotiate value-based contracts with the payer communities. And what I mean by that is the payer communities on the public side is the state of Massachusetts and Mass Health. And we also work with 12 private insurance companies. So we're in this position to really shift gears, make good business decisions. In certain lines of business, we can create deeper and larger operating margins. So once again, I want to make sure the moves that we are making will be sustainable and we can reinvest those margins back into mission.
Yeah, and it's back to stewardship and leadership. I think there's a lot that the governments can do well, but there's you can't replace the creativity and the energy and the expertise of these of smaller organizations like VOA that are part of our community and that can do the things that the government can't do. So these are great investments from the state and the federal government to organizations like VOA, because if anyone can get it done, you can, and your organization. So I think that's great, and keep at it.
Well, thank you for those kind words. And, Peter, I told you during the interview, one of the reasons why I was so excited about this opportunity is, one, because of the mission. I think it builds upon the work I did in my previous organization. So I understand this business very well. And second of all, the organization is in a position to really move to the next level. And between our gross revenues, between our assisted living and Volunteers of America, Massachusetts, we're about a $32 million organization. And that might sound big to some, but we're competing against organizations that are well north of $100 million. And I think we're in a position to be able to move the dial and just help more people.
That's great. Well, thank you for that. I have one final question, and this is just really more about the organization, but and from a staffing and board perspective, diversity is such an important priority for a lot of organizations. Can you briefly talk just about how and why that's important to VOA and what you're doing to increase diversity at the staffing and the leadership and a board perspective?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's a timely question. Look what's happened, in the last 2 years, certainly in the last 16 months around Black Lives Matters and all the health inequities that were, so obvious via the COVID data points. So I've been thinking very clearly about using diversity, equity, inclusion as not just a function of HR, but putting that as one of the cornerstones of our new strategic plan and business model. Over 50% of our employees, Peter, are people from Brown and Black communities. That's important to note. Secondly, over 60% of the clients we serve are people from Brown and Black communities. So we need to be mindful and committed and sensitive that our staff and team, our management team, and our board should look similar to the communities we serve. And I think with this heightened awareness about shifting gears and making sure that we're intentional about DEI. So I think I shared with you that our new HR director, Rejoice, she's lovely. We had over 100 people apply for our job. I was very intentional about identifying her. She's originally from Ghana. She's got great experience. I could have hired 3 other people, but I made a point of hiring an African-American woman who's a leader with great experience and very skilled. And having that intentionality around trying to diversify our staff is very important. And, I have to be mindful. I'm a white male. I was raised in a small town in Minnesota. I'm always learning. I'm trying to become, a different person and evolve both with my philosophy, values, outlook, and, the unconscious bias that we're all born with. So we're doing a major deep dive on DEI. It's going to be part of our strategic plan. With Rejoice and our chief operating officer, we're going to put together an entire training and engagement plan for the entire agency, get feedback from frontline workers, and really begin to be a different type of culture. Organization culture matters so much. And DEI is going to be reflective of what we do and what we think and what we believe in. And when people are competing for employees to retain them, we're trying to compete to secure new employees, that's going to matter. And we just can't talk the talk, we have to walk the walk. And, I'm making that commitment to you, Peter, obviously, as a board member and certainly a leader on the board. And, I look forward to working with you and the board members on this journey.
Well, it is a journey and a challenge, but they're great rewards for us and especially for those we serve. And so thank you for all that you do. I really, this has just been great. And I'm so excited that you're able to join us and so thrilled that you and your leadership team and VOA Massachusetts are really helping the neediest in our community. And I know our listeners are really can appreciate what you do and how a mission-based organization can make a difference. So if our listeners are so inclined, what can they do to help with this mission?
I appreciate that question, Peter. Well, there's a couple things that I would really urge your listeners to consider. First of all, please support our mission. Our website, our new website is being launched in July, and I think you're going to see a lot of rich content about this important work we do. And the day of the Lone Ranger is over. We need partners, we need collaborators, we need supporters. So please support our mission. If you're inclined to volunteer, please call us and we can identify a volunteer operating for you or your children or your house of worship. Of course, I'm always going to be out there asking for people to support us financially, both a personal or a corporate contribution. We have dozens of different partners across the state and both public and private individuals that support our mission. It's desperately important. So I would urge you to do that and be generous. Well, I also think it's important for you to understand that supporting local legislation that impacts our ability to do our job, to fund our program. So your local state rep, city councilor, and certainly both the local rep and the local senators, but also your Congress members. Maybe you live in Catherine Clark's district and she's the Assistant Speaker of the House. We need you to speak up to both state and federal political leaders to support our programs, our line items to make sure we can meet our mission. And the last thing is, I think, is just getting the word out. If you're having a discussion at your house of worship or you're at a block party, it's like, God, I ran into this organization, Volunteers America, Massachusetts. They're doing incredible work, and they're helping homeless individuals. They're helping veterans. They're helping folks that are coming out of correction. I think that mission and that messaging will resonate with both people, and we welcome and their support and we welcome their partnership. And it's always more enriching for me to have a community support to do our job. And certainly when things go wrong, we have to turn to our partners and say, you need to help us get through this. And I certainly feel blessed that we have so many partners in hand that support our mission. And lastly, it comes down to board members like Peter. Peter, I thank you so much for serving. You're a long-serving board member. You're active. You provide me good counsel, support. You also question, say, hey, maybe we should go incrementally as opposed to 0 to 60, which I'm capable of. Anyways, so I just want to say thank you, Peter, on behalf of the staff and myself.
Well, thank you. We really appreciate it. And Charles, thanks so much for being a guest on the podcast. It was just a great joy to have you describe what you do, how you do it, and who you do it for. So thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
What an amazing podcast, Peter. Thank you so much for having Charles on. He was a great guest. Charles, of course, thank you for being here. And our last thank you always goes to you, the listening audience. Thank you for tuning in and listening to the Wealth is in the Details podcast with Peter Raskin. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Peter comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thank you so much for listening today. For everyone at Raskin Planning Group, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Wealth is in the Details podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Lincoln Financial Advisors Corporation. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. Peter Raskin is a registered representative of Lincoln Financial Advisors. Securities offered through Lincoln Financial Advisors Corporation, a broker, dealer, member SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through SageMark Consulting, a division of Lincoln Financial Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Insurance offered through Lincoln affiliates and other fine companies. Raskin Planning Group is not an affiliate of Lincoln Financial Advisors. Lincoln Financial Advisors Corporation and its representatives do not provide legal or tax advice. You may want to consult a legal or tax advisor regarding any legal or tax information as it relates to your personal circumstances.